What you are about to hear will permanently erase the image of noble British ladies and reveal their true predatory nature. These ladies never asked for mercy and never offered any, turning film sets into battlefields and the lives of the men around them into scorched earth. If you are ready to watch flawless porcelain manners crack under the weight of genuine madness, then you have come to the right place. The final story on our list, about the greatest director's most devoted muse, will simply melt your brain. For years she shattered the lives of colleagues for the sake of a single role, and today she lives out her days in total obscurity, remembering none of the men she once betrayed. If you are ready for this injection of pure poison, press like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments which of these furies deserves the title of the most ruthless. Stay until the end, because the truth about what really happened behind the scenes of their perfect lives will genuinely shock you. Ida Lupino. Imagine a woman walking into a room full of smoke-soaked Hollywood executives and instead of batting her eyelashes while waiting for a contract, calmly taking the lighter from their hands and laying down her own rules. Ida Lupino was not just an actress, she was an anomaly, a system glitch in the polished machinery of the Dream Factory. Born in London into a dynasty of performers, her father a celebrated comedian, her mother an actress, Ida never knew a life that wasn't bathed in stage light. But her British upbringing gave her more than impeccable diction. It gave her a spine of steel that refused to bend under the weight of studio pressure. When she arrived in Hollywood, the studios tried to sell her as the English Jean Harlow, a platinum blonde with sultry lips and decorative charm. Lupino quickly understood the problem. Hollywood had plenty of blondes, but women with brains and backbone were rare. With something close to masochistic delight, she began choosing roles that the formidable Bette Davis had rejected in disgust. Ida knew that hidden in those so-called leftovers was the real gold of film noir. In films like They Drive by Night and High Sierra, she created a new kind of woman, one who didn't wait by the window for the hero, but was perfectly capable of pulling the trigger herself if he was late. Her characters carried the bitterness of defeat and the fury of a cornered animal. Critics once called her Bette Davis for the poor, but the phrase was a compliment of the highest order. Where Davis might dramatically wring her hands, Lupino simply looked straight into the camera with the gaze of someone who had seen hell and found the service there perfectly acceptable. Yet Ida's real cruelty was not in the way she portrayed psychopaths, it was in the way she decided to seize power. In the 1940s, a woman sitting in a director's chair was something between a unicorn and a circus oddity. People stared with curiosity, but rarely took it seriously. Lupino used the periods of forced idleness, when Warner Bros. Suspended her for being too rebellious, to remain on set and learn. She didn't wander through boutiques choosing hats. She studied lenses, lighting diagrams, and editing cuts. When her husband, producer Collier Young, founded the independent company, The Filmmakers, Ida finally let her claws show. She became a director unafraid of subjects that made the big studios break into a cold sweat. Rape, bigamy, illegitimate children. She shot films with ruthless efficiency, tight budgets, sharp edges, no mercy for the audience. On the back of her director's chair, she had the words "Mother of Us All" painted, but don't let the title fool you. This mother could squeeze the soul out of an actor for the sake of the right shot. Her 1953 film, The Hitchhiker, remains a masterclass in male fear, directed by a woman with an iron grip. She was among the first to prove that a woman could be more than an object in noir. She could be its architect. Her cruelty was intellectual.
She saw the world without filters and forced the audience to stare straight into the grime with her. Ida Lupino was a slab of ice floating in Hollywood's ocean of sugary illusion. She never searched for sympathy. Her personal life contained as much drama as any script she worked on, yet she never turned it into publicity. She survived polio, 3 marriages, and a lifelong battle for recognition inside the all-male directors club. Her British composure allowed her to keep her dignity even when her acting career began to fade. Instead of mourning lost youth in front of a mirror, she simply shifted direction, moving to television and directing episodes of The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She understood the secret of survival in this ruthless business. If you cannot defeat the system, become its brain. Ida was the kind of ice queen who chose a scepter over a crown and a director's work jacket over a ballroom gown. She did not merely perform cruelty, she dissected it, leaving behind a trail of cigarette smoke and shattered stereotypes about what a pretty little actress from London could actually do.
Deborah Kerr. If you have ever wondered what madness looks like when wrapped in a perfectly starched English collar, look no further than Deborah Kerr. For years, Hollywood tried to present her as the very model of propriety, a red-haired British rose, the embodiment of restraint and purity. But behind that porcelain skin lay such icy calculation and such a deep reservoir of suppressed passions that any open aggression would have seemed childish by comparison. Deborah was a master of what might be called quiet cruelty. She never shouted and never waved a gun. She simply looked at you with those clear, transparent eyes, and you understood that your existence was nothing more than an irritating inconvenience in her perfectly ordered world. She was born in Scotland, and that harsh northern spirit ran through her entire career. In Britain, she became a star quickly, but the true Deborah, the one who carries the chill of a crypt, revealed herself most clearly in the films of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. Think of her in Black Narcissus. Her sister Clodagh is not merely a nun. She is a woman trying to cage the beast within herself through discipline and vows. She wages war against her own body and mind under the suffocating heat of the Himalayas, and in that struggle she is ready to crush anyone who reminds her of her human weakness. Her cruelty here is turned inward, yet it ricochets onto everyone around her, creating such unbearable tension that the air itself seems ready to ring like glass and shatter. When Kerr crossed the ocean, MGM decided they had found a new queen of melodrama. 6 Academy Award nominations and not a single win during her lifetime. Perhaps the voters sensed that unsettling chill that radiated from her and instinctively kept their distance. In From Here to Eternity, she shocked the world, casting aside the image of the proper lady and rolling in the surf with Burt Lancaster. Yet even in that famous beach scene, what one sensed in her was not passion, but something desperate, almost surgical, a woman trying to feel anything at all besides the ice running through her veins. She played Karen Holmes as a woman who avenges her own disappointments through adultery. It was the cruelty of disillusionment. But the true triumph of her icy madness came in The Innocents, the screen adaptation of Henry James. Here her Miss Giddens drives the viewer to the edge of paranoia. She protects the children's innocence from ghosts with such ferocious determination that she herself becomes the house's most terrifying presence. Kerr plays the role with such delicate precision that the line between care and psychological violence vanishes completely. She embodied that particular brand of British upbringing that suppresses emotion until it curdles into poison.
She was the sort of woman who could smile sweetly across a teacup while her mind quietly pronounced your death sentence for wearing the wrong tie. People called her an iron fist in a velvet glove, and the phrase was hardly an exaggeration. Off-screen, Deborah was a professional to the marrow of her bones, demanding from her colleagues the same level of dedication, a dedication that often bordered on tyranny. She had no tolerance for dilettantes or false notes, believing that acting was not self-expression, but a discipline, almost military in its rigor. Her personal life lacked the public scandals of someone like Tallulah Bankhead, but it carried that same British reserve that can be more unsettling than any drunken spectacle. She was married twice, and her second husband, the writer Peter Viertel, once remarked that living with her was like trying to warm yourself beside an iceberg, beautiful, majestic, but ultimately hazardous to your health. Kerr lived a long life, maintaining her aristocratic bearing to the very end. Even when Parkinson's disease began to erode her body, she refused to appear weak. She remains remembered as the Great Ice Queen, a woman who proved that to be truly cruel, a woman need not raise her voice. All she must do is allow the ice inside her to grow until it becomes an entire continent.
Jean Simmons. Jean Simmons embodied that deceptively calm English composure which, in the world of noir, was worth more than gold and more reliable than any revolver. If Ida Lupino was an open challenge and Deborah Kerr a restrained volcano, then Jean Simmons was the still water where the darkest currents ran deep. In her case, the devils beneath the surface did not merely lurk, they ruled. She had the face of a pre-Raphaelite maiden and a voice that could lull a child to sleep, yet behind that gentle facade lived the mind of a predator. Her career in Britain began with the role of Estella in Great Expectations, and it was a perfect match, a distant, icy beauty whose purpose in life was to break men's hearts simply because that was how she had been raised. She carried that chill with her to Hollywood, where she quickly caught the attention of Howard Hughes, a man who knew a thing or two about dangerous women. Hughes bought her contract from Arthur Rank the way one might purchase a prized racehorse, intending to turn her into his personal puppet. But he underestimated British resilience. Jean was no victim, she was a player. When Hughes began tightening his grip, she calmly cut off her famous long hair with a pair of kitchen scissors, making it impossible to continue shooting the film in the image he had designed for her. That small but deliberate act of cruelty toward her own beauty in order to protect her independence captured the essence of her character. The true triumph of her icy persona came in Otto Preminger's film Angel Face. There, Simmons played Diane Tremaine, a young woman whose innocence was nothing more than camouflage for absolute sociopathy. She manipulates Robert Mitchum with such effortless precision that he seems less a hardened noir hero than a naive schoolboy. Her cruelty in the film has no motives a normal person could understand. It is pure, distilled destruction, the cold will to eliminate anything that stands between her and what she wants. She kills without changing her expression on her face, maintaining that same angelic serenity that is far more terrifying than any snarl. She repeated the trick in Footsteps in the Fog, portraying a maid who blackmails her murderous employer. Simmons clearly understood the power her appearance gave her, and she wielded it like a scalpel. In Hollywood, she was often described as too perfect, but it was precisely that perfection that made her unsettling. She could play a missionary in Guys and Dolls, yet even there something in her gaze suggested not compassion, but a quiet, frightening determination to remake the world according to her own will. She was a woman who knew the value of everything, her smile and other people's lives. Off-screen, Jean Simmons was no easy companion either. Her marriage to Stuart Granger became a battlefield of two powerful egos, and more often than not, she emerged the victor thanks to her glacial composure. Granger later recalled that arguing with her was impossible. She would simply switch off, becoming an impenetrable wall of ice against which every emotion shattered. She possessed a rare gift, the ability to be ruthless while remaining perfectly ladylike. In later years, when she struggled with alcoholism, she faced it with the same dignity and privacy that marked her finest performances. She never asked for sympathy. Her cruelty was almost an aesthetic choice. She understood that in a world run by men, survival belongs not to the loudest voice, but to the coldest mind. Jean Simmons remained in film history as the woman who proved that the most dangerous poison is the one served in the thinnest porcelain, accompanied by impeccable manners. She did not simply play ice queens, she defined them, turning every frame into a lesson in how a person can be destroyed by nothing more than the slightest lift of an eyebrow.
Tallulah Bankhead. If chaos had a British accent and an endless supply of cocaine, it would be called Tallulah. Bankhead was not merely an actress, she was radiation, scorching everything alive within a mile's radius and leaving behind only the scent of expensive cigarettes and the echo of her famous low "darling." Though she was born in Alabama into a powerful political family, her true self crystallized in London during the Roaring Twenties. There she became a goddess to an entire generation, a woman who turned self-destruction into high art. Her cruelty was not cold like Deborah Kerr's, it burned like pure alcohol poured onto an open wound. She despised convention with such ferocity that it bordered on pathology. Tallulah could walk onto a stage completely naked or casually announce at a reception with the Queen that her only hobbies were sex and morphine. In Britain she was adored precisely because she was bolder than any man. She drove her Bentley as if all four horsemen of the apocalypse were chasing her at once, and she often hired a taxi simply to drive ahead of her because she constantly forgot the way to her own home. It was arrogance of the highest order, using the world itself as a set for her endless performance. On screen, Tallulah brought the same destructive energy. Her Constance Porter in Hitchcock's Lifeboat is a masterpiece of cynicism. While the other characters panic and pray, Constance worries about whether her mink coat has been ruined and whether she has enough Cartier bracelets to look respectable in case she dies. She plays a woman who sees straight through humanity and finds nothing there but filth. Her cruelty was verbal. She lashed with words like a whip, leaving her opponents no chance to respond. During filming, she drove Hitchcock nearly mad by stubbornly refusing to wear underwear, forcing camera operators and lighting men to witness what was usually kept hidden. When someone complained about her behavior, Hitchcock merely shrugged. "I don't know whose department that is, the wardrobe or the hairdresser, but I'm not about to tell Tallulah how to dress." She was uncontrollable, and that was her greatest power. She smoked up to 120 Douglas cigarettes a day and insisted that cocaine was not addictive because she had been taking it for 30 years and still wasn't hooked. It was gallows humor elevated to its purest form. Her ambisexuality in those days was not merely a personal choice, but a political statement. She had affairs with men and women with the same predatory passion, and never bothered to hide it. Her list of conquests included half of Hollywood and London, and she spoke about it with such disarming honesty that moralists choked on their own outrage. "I'm as pure as freshly fallen slush." That line became her motto. Tallulah's cruelty lay in her absolute freedom. She allowed no one to possess her and destroyed anyone who tried to tame the tsunami she represented. She embodied a kind of egocentrism that was frightening, precisely because it was so sincere. Offstage, she could be generous, but even her generosity carried the flavor of royal charity. She was icy in her indifference to other people's opinions and blazing in her vices.
Even when her voice had become a hoarse rumble and her face a mask of wrinkles and heavy makeup, she continued to play the role of Tallulah Bankhead, the most dangerous and honest woman of her era. She died whispering her final words, "Codeine, bourbon." And so she remained loyal to her demons until her last breath. It was the final punctuation mark in the life of a woman who proved that being a lady does not mean obeying the rules. It means writing your own, even if they lead straight to hell.
Googie Withers. Googie Withers was the kind of woman who could turn an ordinary kitchen towel into a royal mantle and transform the salted fog of London into the backdrop of high tragedy. In the world of British cinema in the 1940s, she occupied a place all her own. She was not an untouchable goddess like Vivien Leigh, yet she carried such steel-bound dignity that any attempt at familiarity shattered against her gaze like a wave against a granite cliff. Her real name, Gladys, sounded far too gentle for the armored charisma she possessed, so Googie, a childhood nickname, became the brand of a woman whose appearance promised warmth while her nature delivered frostbite. She was flesh and blood of British noir, that particular kitchen sink realism where cruelty does not hide behind grand speeches but pours itself into teacups alongside strong black tea. In her most iconic role in It Always Rains on Sunday, Googie created the portrait of a woman who has buried her dreams beneath layers of household dust and now resents the world for allowing her to do it. Her Rose Sandgate is the empress of the slums, ruling from a throne built out of disappointments and old grudges. When a former lover appears at her door, a fugitive from the life she once had, a life where passion still existed, Googie does not play love, she plays possession, instinct, and the fierce hunger to reclaim what the past owes her. Her cruelty here is the cruelty of a survivor, someone ready to step over the law, morality, and even her aging husband for the ghost of a chance to feel alive again. Withers possessed the rare ability to project aristocratic pride even when her characters were standing behind a bar or scrubbing the floor. It was not the sort of elegance taught in drama schools, but an instinctive sense of superiority that often unsettled her male co-stars. In Night and the City, she formed a perfect counterpart to Richard Widmark, playing Helen, the wife of a nightclub owner who dreams of securing a liquor license of her own. In that role, Googie demonstrated what true female ruthlessness in business looked like. She does not seduce, she calculates. She does not plead, she takes. Her face in the film becomes a frozen mask of ambition, one that leaves no room for compassion. She was the queen of the ruins of post-war London, a woman who understood that in a world where bombs had destroyed homes, the only thing that could remain intact was the strength of your own will. Her distinctly British style of acting, sharp, dry, stripped of sentimentality, made her an icon for those who admired not weakness in women, but their ability to become instruments of destruction when necessary. She never sought the audience's affection, she demanded their respect, and she received it fully, leaving behind a chill that could reach the bones even on the hottest afternoon. Off-screen, Googie embodied professional discipline taken almost to the extreme. She despised laziness and tardiness, believing that a film set was not a playground for self-expression, but a battlefield where everyone had to know their maneuver. Her marriage to actor John McCallum lasted decades, something Hollywood might have considered dull, but within their partnership, Googie was the quiet general, shaping the strategy of their shared success with the precision of a chess master. At the height of her fame, she moved to Australia simply because she decided it would be better for her family. It was the decision of a true lady, one who does not look back to ask the crowd for approval. She belonged to that old school where personal feelings were sacrificed to duty, and duty was performed with such icy perfection that it could make one uneasy. Googie was a woman who could wound with a single word and resurrect with a glance of contempt.
Until the final days of her long life, she maintained that same straight-backed posture and piercing gaze that made anyone speaking to her instinctively check whether all their buttons were properly fastened. She proved that a true ice queen has no need for a crown of diamonds. Her character alone was enough, tempered in the furnace of British restraint and the harsh aftermath of war. Her cruelty was honest, her coldness genuine, and her greatness undeniable in a world where too many people tried to appear warmer than they truly were.
Kathleen Byron. If Deborah Kerr in Black Narcissus was ice cracking under the pressure of circumstance, then Kathleen Byron became the open wound through which primordial chaos flooded the sterile world of the convent. Her sister Ruth is not merely a character, she is a manifesto of female rage, driven to a pure, distilled madness. Kathleen did not play obsession, she radiated it through every pore of her skin, turning the screen into a zone of seismic activity. In the history of British cinema, there are few images as powerful as the moment her face appears after she has cast aside her sacred vows and paints her lips a violent red. That gesture was both the ultimate blasphemy and a declaration of war against the entire world of order and restraint. Byron possessed a face that was impossible to ignore. Her sharp features and blazing eyes created the sense of a permanent threat, the presence of a woman who no longer feared God, the devil, or public opinion. The cruelty in her portrayal of Sister Ruth was not calculated but elemental, born from the dark bile of unrequited desire for Mr. Dean. She embodied that side of female nature which patriarchal society had spent centuries trying to lock away in convents or madhouses, and Kathleen tore the locks from the doors. Her confrontation with Deborah Kerr's character became one of the great duels in cinema. While Kerr struggled to preserve dignity and composure, Byron steadily destroyed herself and everything around her, proving that in the battle between discipline and madness, the latter always holds the advantage, because it has nothing left to lose. Her final attack on Kerr at the edge of the Himalayan cliff is more than a dramatic scene. It is a metaphor for how repressed sexuality can erupt into murderous force. Kathleen Byron achieved something few actresses of her generation dared attempt. She showed that a woman could be truly terrifying without the help of monstrous masks. All that was required was to let the darkness inside rise to the surface. Directors Powell and Pressburger understood what a dangerous instrument they had in their hands and used it with full force. Byron herself later recalled that after Black Narcissus was released, people on the street literally recoiled from her, expecting her to lunge for their throats or start howling at the moon. It was the highest compliment an actress could receive, proof that she had created a figure sharp enough to pierce the viewer and remain buried in the subconscious like a cold needle. Beyond her most famous role, Kathleen remained a woman of depth and complexity, carrying that distinctly British strain of intellectual snobbery that has no patience for fools. She never chased cheap popularity and never tried to charm audiences with sweet or comforting roles. Her career became a gallery of fractured women, fatal beauties, and characters politely described as difficult. She was too sharp-edged for Hollywood, which preferred more pliable material. Her cruelty as an actress lay in her refusal to compromise. She never tried to make her characters likable if the story demanded they be monstrous. Sentimentality repelled her. She believed that art should burn, not soothe. Even in later years, appearing in small roles, such as in Saving Private Ryan, she retained that same unsettling intensity of gaze that could make younger actors forget their lines. Kathleen Byron proved that ice can burn, and that holiness is often nothing more than a thin crust over an abyss where real life boils, stripped of comfort and mercy.
She was and remains one of the great mad queens of the British screen, a woman who dared to look into the eyes of her own shadow and forced the rest of us to do the same.
Vivien Leigh. If you thought Scarlett O'Hara was the peak of sharp-tongued ferocity in Vivien Leigh's repertoire, then you simply never saw her inside the British studio halls, where she cast aside the corset of the Southern coquette and revealed the fangs of a true predator. Vivien was not merely a beautiful woman. She was biological weaponry wrapped in the thinnest silk, a creature with the instincts of a Siamese cat that purrs only until the moment it decides to sink its claws into your throat. Her British training gave her the icy precision that so many American starlets lacked. She knew how to deliver an insult as though it were a compliment to a queen, and how to destroy a man with nothing more than the slight movement of a carefully lined eye. In Caesar and Cleopatra, based on the play by Bernard Shaw, she presented the world with a version of the Egyptian queen that carried not the warmth of desert sands, but the chill of ancient marble. Her Cleopatra is no love-struck fool. She is a calculating young sadist, learning the mechanics of power from an aging Caesar and surpassing her teacher in ruthlessness. While Claude Rains attempted to embody weary statesmanship, Vivien radiated the pure, distilled whim of a tyrant. She was far too intelligent to play merely a beautiful ornament, and her intellectual dominance over her co-stars could be felt almost physically. This was cruelty of highest order, the quiet knowledge that the world belongs to you by right of beauty and talent, and woe to anyone who dares stand in the path of a small woman with an iron grip. Vivien Leigh possessed the rare ability to turn her fragility into a lethal weapon. There was always a fracture in her, a hairline crack in porcelain that promised catastrophe. She was called an ice queen not because she lacked feeling, but because her emotions were frozen into something sharp enough to cut. She was drawn to roles like Regina Giddens in The Little Foxes, a character steeped in poison and family hatred. On the stage, she proved she could be even more merciless than performers such as Tallulah Bankhead or Bette Davis. Her cruelty had an elegance to it. She destroyed her adversaries gracefully, without noise, leaving behind nothing but the scent of expensive perfume and the bitter aftertaste of defeat. Even her struggle with bipolar disorder, something people in those days preferred to whisper about in corners, gave her performances an unsettling authenticity. She acted on the edge of a nervous collapse, and that electric tension passed straight through the screen, making audiences feel a sudden chill they could not explain. She could be a delicate violet one moment, and the next a fury capable of burning anyone to ash with a single look, especially anyone foolish enough to threaten her territory or her man, the great Olivier. Off-screen, Vivien demanded impossible perfection from life and from everyone around her. Her British perfectionism bordered on tyranny. She forgave weakness neither in herself nor in others. She could rehearse a single scene until complete exhaustion, until it felt as if the soul itself had been rubbed raw, and she expected the same relentless devotion from those beside her. Her home was a fortress of impeccable taste and icy discipline. In real life, she was Cleopatra as well, capricious, commanding, and profoundly lonely within the grandeur she carried. She understood that beauty is a perishable commodity, and she used it like a weapon in her war for immortality. Vivien Leigh remains in memory not as a victim of her illnesses, but as a conqueror, a woman who forced both Hollywood and London to bow to her will. Her cruelty was simply the other face of her brilliance. She did not know how to be ordinary, and in that uncompromising climb toward the summit, she spared no one.
She was the Siamese cat of the British screen, beautiful, dangerous, and utterly self-sufficient in her cold radiance, a glow that has not dimmed even after decades.
Alida Valli. If you are searching in cinema for the image of absolute granite-like detachment, forget Hollywood hysteria and look into the face of Alida Valli. In the British masterpiece The Third Man, she revealed such a degree of emotional frost that even winter in Vienna seemed like a warm fireplace beside her. Valli was not British by birth, she came from Italy, yet her manner of acting, her poise, and the distance she instantly erected between herself and the audience made her the perfect ice queen of English noir. She embodied the Europe that had died under the bombs, proud, devastated, and infinitely cynical. Her Anna Schmidt in Carol Reed's film is a woman who no longer believes in love, justice, or even American cigarettes. Her cruelty lies in a complete, deafening indifference to the so-called good men. While Joseph Cotten tries to play the noble savior, Alida looks straight through him as if through the dirty glass of a tram window. Her loyalty belongs not to a man, but to a shadow, her supposedly dead lover, Harry Lime. That devotion to a monster becomes her only anchor in a world where morality has turned into an unaffordable luxury. Valli possessed a face that Carol Reed once called the face of exile. She did not perform suffering, she presented it as an established fact, something that required no sympathy. Her cruelty was passive, but no less devastating for it. In The Third Man, there is the famous final scene, the long cemetery avenue where she walks straight toward the camera, passing the man who waits for her. She walks past him without turning her head, without the slightest movement of her face. That walk is one of the greatest acts of cinematic arrogance ever captured on film. She does not merely reject him, she erases him from existence through the sheer force of her indifference. Alida Valli proved that silence and a straight spine can be sharper than any dagger. She possessed that unbreakable European core that Hollywood never quite managed to crack. David O. Selznick attempted to turn her into a second Ingrid Bergman, but Valli was far too cold for American melodrama. She despised the studio system, the artificial smiles, the compulsory happy endings. Her cruelty was intellectual. She understood that life is a procession of losses, and she met them with the dignity of a fallen empress. Later, when she worked with Luchino Visconti in Senso, she carried that image to its extreme, portraying a countess willing to betray everything for passion, yet doing so with such icy composure that it chills the blood. Off-screen, Alida remained just as enigmatic, hidden behind the frosted glass of her private life. She gave no confessional interviews, never displayed her dramas in public, and never tried to appear approachable or familiar. Her British period left a deep mark on the noir tradition precisely because of her ability to be a stranger among her own. She was a woman who understood the value of silence. There was always something in her gaze that made men feel small and faintly ridiculous in their attempts at dominance. Valli was a master of distance. She never allowed the camera to come too close to her soul, preserving her right to mystery. Her cruelty was a form of self-defense. In a world where everyone wanted to take a piece of her beauty, she chose instead to turn herself into a statue, cold, unreachable, untouchable. She became the icy maiden of the post-war ruins, a woman whose presence on screen filled every frame with a sense of inevitable fate. Alida Valli proved that real strength does not lie in shouting, but in the ability to walk past your own happiness with your head held high when that happiness demands a compromise with your pride.
she remains a monument to arrogance and pain, preserved in the black and white elegance of an era when even betrayal was expected to possess impeccable style.
Gloria Grahame. If you are looking in the history of classic cinema for a woman whose face was a map of dangerous attachments and whose soul seemed trapped in the mirrored labyrinth of noir, then Gloria Grahame is your final stop. She was a bad girl, not by script, but by nature itself, a creature with a voice like silk brushing over broken glass and eyes that carried both an invitation and a death sentence. Gloria never tried to play the part of a British lady, yet she brought into the shadowy alleys of noir the same intellectual cruelty and icy detachment that made her a worthy rival to any queen of the genre. She was known as the girl with the lower lip, a reference to her famously pouty mouth, which rumor claimed she sometimes padded with cotton to achieve the exact shade of sensual arrogance she wanted. But Gloria's true ruthlessness lay deeper, in her ability to use vulnerability as a trap. In a Lonely Place, she created Laurel Gray, a woman who falls in love with a man who might be a killer. In her love there is as much poison as tenderness. She is not afraid of Humphrey Bogart. She regards his weakness and his rage with a cool distance that only the coldest temperaments possess. Gloria mastered the form of psychological terror served beneath the mask of weary beauty and fatal disappointment. The real noir in her life began when the camera stopped rolling. Gloria Grahame's cruelty toward her own reputation and toward society's rules bordered on madness. She married 4 times, and each marriage felt like an act of self-immolation. The most explosive note in her biography, one that made respectable citizens of the 40s and 50s shudder, was her relationship with Anthony Ray. That might have passed without scandal if Anthony had not been the son of her second husband, the great director Nicholas Ray, from an earlier marriage. Gloria married her own stepson, a boy she had known since childhood. The act was so brazen, so violently dismissive of every social taboo, that even Hollywood, a place accustomed to scandal, choked on its outrage. It was her form of cruelty toward society. She lived as if morality did not exist, as if only her own desires mattered, sharp and cold as shards of ice. She paid dearly for it. Her career faltered, the leading roles disappeared, and her name became synonymous with scandal. But Gloria only pressed her lips tighter and continued performing her greatest role, the woman who does not care about your rules. On screen, her cruelty often appeared through physical suffering. In Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, her character, Debbie Marsh, has boiling coffee thrown into her face, destroying her beauty. Gloria played the transformation from glittering ornament to vengeful ghost with such disturbing authenticity that audiences felt the scar on her face was merely the outward sign of something that had always lived inside her. She possessed a rare ability to project eroticism through pain and cynicism. She was not a classic femme fatale. She was a woman who had already died somewhere deep inside and now watched the world burn itself out. Off-screen, she fought obsessively to preserve her fading youth, turning to cosmetic surgery again and again until her face began to lose its natural expression. Slowly, it hardened into that same motionless mask of the Ice Queen she had spent years constructing. It was cruelty directed inward, the slow destruction of her own identity in service of an image. Gloria Grahame remains one of noir's darkest stars, a woman who descended into the basements of the human psyche and chose to stay there, carrying with her that chilling, elegant grace. She proved that a true lady of noir is not the woman who wears pearls, but the one who can smile while holding a blood-stained knife in her hand and a frozen wilderness in her heart. Lizabeth Scott. If film noir were a musical genre, Lizabeth Scott would be its lowest, most dangerous chord, a deep vibration that lingers in the air long after the note has been struck. They called her the Threat, and it was no cheap invention of studio publicity departments. Unlike many actresses of her time, who wore the mask of the femme fatale only for the duration of a role, Elizabeth seemed born with that look, heavy, appraising, and utterly devoid of sentiment. Her poised bearing and low, husky voice, often compared to Lauren Bacall's, created around her the aura of an impregnable fortress. But where Bacall had the charm of a streetwise ally in a skirt, Scott was pure distilled poison served in a crystal glass. Her cruelty was never an emotional flare, but a matter of cold calculation. She played women who understood the exact price of comfort and were willing to sign any check so long as it was paid with someone else's blood. In Too Late for Tears, she created perhaps the most merciless figure in the history of noir. Her Jane Palmer is neither a victim of circumstance nor a tragic innocent led astray. She is a predator who stumbles upon a bag of money and instantly transforms into a perfectly functioning machine of greed and violence. She kills her husband, blackmails criminals, lies with the same ease others use to breathe. There is not the slightest trace of doubt in her eyes, only the icy glint of gold coins. She was among the first to show that a woman's greed could be a more destructive force than any man's lust. Elizabeth Scott possessed a rare ability to radiate danger even while standing perfectly still in an immaculate suit. Her beauty was architectural, sharp cheekbones, flawless hair, the cold sheen of polished elegance. She was the ice queen of noir, using her sexuality not as bait, but as a close-range weapon. She did not lure men into her trap. She persuaded them to leap into the abyss themselves, convinced it was the only sensible choice. Her cruelty was intellectual. She located the weaknesses in those around her and struck with absolute precision, leaving no bruises, only deep tears in the psyche. Hollywood often underestimated her, dismissing her merely as a pale echo of other stars, yet Elizabeth was far more complex. She brought to the screen a certain restraint that transformed ordinary thrillers into psychological ordeals. Off-screen, she lived like a recluse, guarding her private life with the same ferocity her characters reserved for their stolen fortunes. Rumors swirled around her. Tabloids tried to drag her into scandals about her personal life and alleged affairs, but Scott simply took them to court and won, forcing the gossip columns to choke on their own poison. She was a woman who did not forgive trespass. Her career in noir was brief but blinding, like a gunshot in darkness. She knew that the era of such heroines was fading, and she chose to leave on her own terms rather than wait until Hollywood cast her as kindly aunts and harmless society ladies. Elizabeth Scott remains in memory as a silhouette with a pistol in an elegant hand, a woman whose presence in a room seemed to lower the temperature by several degrees. She was a master of quiet terror, proving that true cruelty requires neither shouting nor tears. All it takes is being Elizabeth Scott, a woman who views the world through the sights of a gun and never misses. Her coldness was her armor, and her cruelty the only way to remain herself in a world that demanded softness from women. She was, and remains, one of the most enigmatic ice maidens of the screen, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a handful of films that still make audiences shiver when she slowly, with the calm dignity of a queen, pours another glass of something fatal. She was a poison people longed to taste, even knowing that no antidote existed. Jane Greer. If betrayal had a face, it would belong to Jane Greer, and that face would be so beautiful you might willingly offer your neck to her blade just to admire the delicate curve of her brow for one more second. In the noir masterpiece Out of the Past, Jane Greer created more than a classic femme fatale. She created the definitive portrait of feminine cruelty disguised as absolute, almost biblical innocence. Her Kathy Moffat is a rat in the most aristocratic sense of the word. She does not merely lie, she lives in a permanent state of double deception, where falsehood is not a tool, but the very fabric of her existence. Greer possessed a rare gift. Her doe-like eyes could radiate such desperate pleas for salvation that even a hardened detective like Robert Mitchum forgot both his instincts and his common sense. But the moment he turned away to pour her a drink, those same eyes became two cold gun barrels, quietly calculating the trajectory of the bullet. Though American by passport, Greer carried the same dry, almost European fatalism in her performance that gave her Kathy an air of distance beyond understanding. She was a woman who could betray the same man twice, shoot his partner, steal $40,000, and still appear as though she were merely a victim of circumstance, hopelessly tangled in her own lace. Jane Greer's cruelty felt almost biological. She did not perform malice, she performed the absence of empathy as something natural. In Out of the Past, there is a moment when she steps out of the blazing Mexican sun into the cool shade of a cafe, and in that instant the audience understands they are watching a predator. Kathy Moffat does not know pity because pity belongs to human weakness, and she is closer to a force of nature than to a human being. She kills not out of hatred, but out of convenience. If someone becomes an obstacle, they must simply be removed. Greer accomplishes this with the effortless grace of brushing dust from an expensive dress. She was often called the woman with the dangerous smile, and the description was accurate. Whenever she smiled, it felt as though funeral music had begun somewhere off-screen. Greer brought into noir a kind of effortless aristocratic coldness, the same calm authority with which an English lady might give instructions to a servant. Behind the camera, her life was no less dramatic. She was discovered by Howard Hughes, who fell in love with her photograph in Life magazine. Hughes attempted to place her in a golden cage, controlling every step of her career, but Greer was not the sort of woman who could be domesticated. She escaped him, married Alida Valli, later divorced, and returned to the screen with her independence intact and her icy gaze unchanged. She understood how to deal with tyrants, perhaps because she herself could be a tyrant in a skirt, ruling through the careful manipulation of male desire. Her cruelty was an intellectual trap. She made men believe they were the hunters, when in reality they were already hanging from hooks in her pantry. In The Big Steal, she once again displayed that rare ability to be the only adult in a room full of armed fools. She had no respect for brute force, preferring instead the delicate precision of psychological calculation. Jane Greer proved that a true ice queen does not need to appear cold on the surface. She may seem warm, gentle, even faintly scented with violets, yet inside there is a mechanism of stainless steel. She remains in memory as Hollywood's greatest deceiver, a woman who transformed betrayal into a form of high art. Her legacy is not merely a series of performances, but a warning to anyone who still believes in innocence. Behind the softest gaze, there may lie an abyss where neither love nor remorse exists, only endless cold and the quiet rustle of banknotes. She was and remains the queen of the double game, whose cruelty was made all the more terrifying by the fact that she was endlessly charming.
Mary Astor. If noir had an architecture, Mary Astor would be its hidden foundation, the quiet, unbreakable slab upon which all those towering structures of deceit and vice are built. Mary did not simply act in films, she survived them, turning her own biography into an endless series of elegant and ruthless maneuvers. She belonged to the old guard long before the genre of noir even had a name, bringing with her that unmistakable poise and icy irony that cannot be imitated.
Her Bridget O'Shaughnessy in The Maltese Falcon is no helpless woman in distress, but a grand master of deception, moving pieces across the board so swiftly that even Humphrey Bogart's Sam Spade can barely keep up with her hands. Astor possessed a face that seemed carved from frosted glass. It let the light pass through, yet never revealed what lay beneath the surface. Her cruelty was intellectual, rooted deeply in an understanding of human nature as an inexhaustible source of greed. She did not merely lie, she breathed lies, making them so tangible and alluring that men practically begged her to continue the fatal performance. She was the first ice queen to understand that vulnerability is the most effective form of control, and she wielded her tears like acid, slowly dissolving a man's will. Yet Mary Astor's greatest cruelty revealed itself not on the screen, but in a courtroom in 1936, when her private diary became public property. In that so-called Blue Diary, she described her affair with playwright George S. Kaufman with a chilling, almost clinical frankness, evaluating his talents with the same detached precision a jeweler might use to judge the clarity of a diamond. At a time when a single misplaced word could destroy a career, Mary turned her humiliation into a weapon. She did not weep or plead for forgiveness. She sat in court with perfect posture, wearing an immaculate hat, gazing at the jury with the calm assurance of a woman who knew everything about them, while they knew only what she chose to reveal. That composure and absolute absence of shame turned her into an icon for those who understood that real power lies in mastering one's own darkness. She was a master of psychological warfare, and her ability to maintain distance became her signature. She once divided an actor's life into 5 stages, and through each of them she remained first and foremost the Mary Astor type, a woman whose elegance was merely a thin crust of ice stretched over an abyss of despair and cynicism. She was a predator who knew how to wait in the shadows for the perfect moment, never betraying herself with a single unnecessary gesture. On screen, her characters always seemed on the edge of collapse, yet it was the kind of collapse a professional killer experiences when the gun suddenly jams. In The Great Lie, she even managed to outplay Bette Davis, winning an Academy Award for her portrayal of the fiercely egocentric pianist Sandra Kovac. Astor infused the role with such breathtaking arrogance and disdain for everyone around her that the audience almost instinctively took her side, simply because her honesty about her own selfishness felt more genuine than the polite hypocrisies of others. Her cruelty was aesthetic. She despised mediocrity and sentimentality, seeing both as symptoms of a weak mind. Off-screen, she fought alcoholism and her personal demons with the same strict discipline she applied to her craft. In the final years of her life, she withdrew to a convent, not to repent, but to reclaim the silence the world had spent decades trying to shatter with its noise. Mary Astor remains in history like a silhouette behind frosted glass, unreachable, sharp, and profoundly alone in her grandeur. She proved that ice is not merely cold. Under the right light, it can be blinding. She was the architect of her own legend, a woman who understood that in the game called life, the victor is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who knows when to fall silent and pull the trigger.
Lana Turner. If there is a woman in the history of cinema whose life did not merely resemble a noir film, but seemed soaked in real, warm, and sticky human blood, it is Lana Turner. She was the perfect product of the Hollywood machine, the famous sweater girl whose curves made men forget even the most basic manners.
But behind that pin-up facade lived a nature hardened by cold pragmatism. In The Postman Always Rings Twice, she created the canonical image of Cora Smith, a woman dressed in blinding white who plans the murder of her own husband with the same calm detachment with which she might order breakfast. Lana brought to the role a particular discipline of emotional control, a storm raging beneath the surface while the outside world sees only a flawless mask of powder and lipstick. Her cruelty was quiet, domestic, and therefore far more unsettling. She played a woman for whom a man was either a stepping stone or an inconvenience to be removed by another man's hands. Turner mastered the art of delegating violence, persuading lovers to commit crimes in exchange for nothing more than the reward of her approval. She understood a simple rule: if you want to remain clean, you must make someone else dirty their hands. But the real drama of Lana Turner's life did not unfold beneath studio lights. It erupted in her own bedroom in 1958. Lana was an ice queen who sometimes made fatal mistakes, falling for men even more dangerous than herself. Her relationship with gangster Johnny Stompanato, an associate of the notorious Mickey Cohn, became a prolonged war of nerves. Johnny was violent. He beat her. He threatened to slash her famous face with a razor. For a time she endured it, until the situation reached the point of no return. One night, her teenage daughter intervened while Stompanato was in the middle of another rage. Defending her mother, she seized a kitchen knife and plunged it into his stomach. The gangster died almost instantly. The entire world watched the trial that followed. There, Lana Turner delivered perhaps the greatest and most ruthless performance of her life, the role of the devastated mother and helpless victim. She wept on the witness stand with such conviction that the jury ruled the killing justifiable. Yet the cynics of Hollywood whispered another version. They suggested Lana understood exactly what she was doing, and that the tragedy merely wrapped her in the dark aura of noir that would transform her into a legend. Her particular form of cruelty was the ability to convert real death into headlines, ratings, and new contracts. Lana Turner lived her life like a long leap through fire. 7 husbands, endless affairs, abortions, scandals. She spared no one, including herself. She possessed that remarkable ability to survive anything while maintaining the appearance of a woman who had just stepped out of an expensive salon. Even as her career began to fade, she refused to let the public see weakness. She understood that beauty was not a gift, but a weapon, one that required constant polishing and care. Her composure after Stompanato's death shocked many. She returned to work almost immediately, transforming personal tragedy into a tool of publicity. Lana Turner proved that in Hollywood, the line between cinema and reality is so thin it can be cut with an ordinary kitchen knife. She stands as the final note of this story, a symbol that behind every ice queen there is a shadow that carries not merely coldness, but the silence of a grave. She was and remains the woman who smiled at the world dressed in white, while her past was stained deep crimson.
These 13 women did not merely play roles, they elevated female cruelty to the level of high art, turning cold British restraint into Hollywood's most lethal weapon. We have seen how Ida Lupino broke the spine of the studio system, how Deborah Kerr concealed madness behind a perfectly starched collar, and how Lana Turner washed away stage makeup with real blood. Each of them proved that in a world invented by men for men, survival belongs not to the woman who cries the loudest, but to the one whose gaze can freeze hell itself. Their cruelty was not an accident. It was a form of sovereignty, a way to preserve themselves in an industry that devoured the weak for breakfast.
They taught us that a true ice queen does not need a crown to rule. Perfect posture and a complete absence of illusions are more than enough. Modern cinema may try to warm us with cheap optimism, but we know better. There is nothing more compelling, more honest than that scorching cold radiating from the black and white shadows of the past. In Hollywood, fashions in kindness come and go, but ice remains forever. It reminds us that behind the most dazzling smile there may always lie an abyss where mercy has no place, where there is only impeccable style and the will to win at any cost. Take care of yourselves, my dears, and remember, if a woman looks at you the way an iceberg looked at the Titanic, it may already be too late to change course.